Let's talk about counselling. Something I really love, a craft, an art, a science. I've been studying it and developing it for uh, 30 years, and still love it to this day, and still learn about it to this day. And something that really upsets me is seeing wonderful techniques and concepts from counselling being absolutely becoming something toxic in society. And it's terrible. Some ideas that are wonderful in the counseling office that help people progress being brought out into the society and totally bastardized across lots of areas. I think particularly maybe higher education seems to have really lost the plot for this one, but in lots of areas. And this concept is being triggered. This idea that you can be triggered. And let me explain to you what triggered actually means and how it's actually helpful. And then I'll explain to you how it's totally become something toxic and exactly why it is toxic. So what triggered means is you're talking to somebody in counseling and they're describing a situation that they found very difficult, very challenging, very scary, and you're listening to it, and it actually sounds like that situation was not as unsafe as they experienced it to be. And a not uncommon example might be somebody walking into a new building. Maybe they have an appointment with somebody and feeling absolutely terrified that something terrible is going to happen. And for them, that experience is absolutely real. And in counseling, it's important to validate and say, that was that's genuinely how you experienced, to empathize, to reflect it, to understand it. And that's what they felt like. But you from what they're telling you, you're saying you were just walking into an appointment with maybe your doctor or your accountant, or might have been for a job interview, whatever. And you say you understand that was not a life-threatening, dangerous situation as they experienced it, or as maybe not life. They might have experienced it as life-threatening, but certainly as a really almost terrifying experience. So you as a counselor, this is somebody who's been triggered. They've had an experience, and their reaction to that experience, that situation doesn't really belong to that situation, and it's not a functional, helpful reaction to it. So in counselling, you process this with the client. You suggest a few things. You talk about it. You start with validating their experience, and then talking about it more. And sometimes when you speak about it out loud, it gives you a bit of perspective on everything, and you can get a new insight into it, and they can begin to realize that reaction didn't really belong to that situation. It wasn't a functional, healthy reaction to it. And that's a great insight to have, because then when you have an insight, it's so helpful to put a word on something. Because when you can give something a word, you can have control over it. So you might suggest, it sounds like you were triggered in that situation. And when they realize, oh, you know what, I was, because now I look back at it, I realize my reaction was just not appropriate to what was going on. And they have this wonderful new word called being triggered, and they realize that's what it is. And then when you have that, they can be empowered to say, well, how do you become more aware of when you're being triggered? And you can talk about being more aware, mindfulness, and being more aware of the symptoms, and there's specific symptoms of arousal, hyperarousal, intrusive thoughts, or feeling disassociated from it, or all kinds of different. They can get used to what triggering normally feels like for them, and they realize that. And then mindfulness to practice when they become aware of it, and then they can use grounding skills to help them reduce that level. And over time of doing this, it can really reduce the amount of triggering they experience and then get on with life. They might experience it a bit, but they will feel now that they have control over this, rather than previously being triggered. They didn't even know what was happening. They didn't even know what was happening. They didn't have a word for it, and it was controlling their life. Whereas now, through counseling, they have control over it. And that's a wonderful journey. A part of, in therapy and counseling, there's many different journeys you go on with people, and many different things you work on. That would be one of them. A common enough journey to go from somebody feeling triggered, being triggered, really struggling, really debilitating their life, having no awareness of what's going on. And the journey is to becoming aware of that's happening, and then developing skills to do it. And then over time, developing those skills so that now it no longer controls their life, but they rather feel they have control over this concern. And over time, it can reduce. And you can measure that journey, which is important. Now, so that's a healthy counseling skill many people find just a really liberating and enlightening part of the journey. So let's talk about the toxic use of this idea in wherever, schools or cultural movements or education or wherever. So when somebody's triggered, to say to them, to say, oh, that was terrible, what happened? Oh my God, you need a safe space, is absolutely toxic to them, because you're saying you were right to be triggered, that this is the correct and healthy response to this situation. To feel, so that this was a really dangerous, really scary, really threatening situation. You're telling them, oh, it was, or you're right to feel that way. We need to put you in a safe space, or we need to stop this from happening. Whereas it's really just normal life. And it may be unpleasant, and it may have been a difficult situation, or it may have been a situation some people wouldn't react to at all, or just go by them. Maybe some people would be more sensitive to it. And the correct response is to help them understand that it wasn't life-threatening. It wasn't that dangerous to you. And let's help you develop some skills so you can deal with this and understand what's going on, and so on. And maybe if you were being mistreated to some degree, how to advocate for yourself and address that, or maybe to realize actually there was nothing threatening or toxic about the situation, and you could have just sat there and listened and disagreed, or you could have just left, or to help them realize that they were triggered, and help them manage that better and develop the resilience and strength to deal with life in a healthy, well-functioning manner. But to tell them to say, oh my God, it was actually a terrible thing that happened. Oh my gosh, this can never happen again. We've got to make sure this stops. We got to find ways to protect you from this happening, is toxic to that person. It's detrimental to their well-being. It's crippling to them, is what it is. It's like that person who walks into the office for the first time and feels really, really, terrified about what's going to happen next, and they're going in to meet their, maybe just going in for and maybe they're meeting a friend for coffee, but they have some experience that's terrifying them. And to tell them, oh, that was a really terrible experience, you better watch it and be careful that don't go back there again. Something bad could have happened. How debilitating, how terrible a thing to tell somebody that. So this idea of going around telling people when they're triggered, the very definition of triggered is that what happened wasn't as dangerous as you perceived it to be. That's the definition of it. That's why it's helpful to understand you were triggered, so you can have a healthier, more adjusted approach. But to tell them, it is that dangerous, it's terrible. It's not true. It's harmful to them. It encourages them to go down a path of more dysfunction and feeling debilitated. It deprives them of the opportunity of developing some resilience. It deprives them of the opportunities of developing healthier ways to respond to the same situation, so that in the future it mightn't even affect them in that way. So I just see this going on all the time, and a lot of people being really damaged, and a lot of people thinking that they're helping other people by doing this, and they're not. They're doing something bad. So that's it's just saddening to see, and it just needs to stop. It just needs, when people are triggered and they're having a really tense reaction to a situation, they need to be helped. Talk it through, figure it out. Those are healthy responses to it, but to really maybe leave it and process it, and maybe develop some new skills for dealing it, and then return to that same situation with those new skills. These are all normal, healthy, positive ways of developing through the adversity of life. And, for human development requires adversity, and it requires the support and resources to help you grow and learn from this adversity. And that's a big part of what it is to be human. And in a way, this approach of telling people you're triggered and saying something terrible happened and is depriving them of this healthy developmental response to adversity through which we all grow. So it's just a terrible, terrible thing. And hopefully this video will help you to be aware of that. And maybe when people are saying to others, you're being triggered, this is terrible, that you can open up a new conversation and say, well, let's look at what's going on here. How unsafe is this situation? Is this, what other possible ways have you for dealing with this? Help the person develop resilience and grow through it, develop insight from it, from what is challenging. And hopefully after this video, you can be one of those people that is actually helpful to people when they are experiencing being triggered rather than harmful to them. So as an asset to your journey to help you on your way, I recommend you check out my book called Recovery Made Simple. Oh, I can't really see that, can you? Let's see. No, it's not going to turn up, is it? Well, Recovery Made Simple. Why Suffer? It's available on Amazon. It's a quick read. It's very straightforward. And I think if we keep things simple and get the fundamentals right, it will avoid a lot of this. An awful lot of suffering will be avoided by getting the fundamentals of recovery right. And there's only really 2 fundamentals that I talk about in the book to get right. So please think about checking that out.